Good evening, and welcome to the Canadian Federation of University Women's Spring Fling. I love the name of your spring event, the Spring Fling. Normally there would be a dinner, normally we would all be together in the same room, chatting, drinking wine, having fun, but it's still COVID. It's still COVID, and we're still here in Zoom land. So I apologize for that, but there's nothing I can do about that. I did decide, however, that I would use this as an opportunity to showcase the launch of my new YouTube channel, the Pillsy Report. So instead of greeting you live in person and doing the Zoom thing where I'm trying to see if you're laughing or not all at once and I'm freaking out, we decided to film the Pillsy Report and show it to you as the first and ever audience of what will be a monthly series featuring yours truly, Joe Pilitary. So the first ever edition of the Pillsy Report will talk a little bit about me, my childhood, where and how I grew up, a little bit about how grown-up Joe is doing with his wife and his 4 kids, and COVID and his parents. I also want to tell you about the time I had a total nervous breakdown in 2008. I think that would be just a heartwarming way to end the evening. And then who else? We'll figure out what we're going to talk about tonight. But I will be here watching you live, so I will be sitting in a hotel room somewhere in Michigan, watching all of your faces as you watch the Pillsy Report. So, that being said, here it is. So I thought I'd start by telling you a little bit about my childhood. I grew up in a small town in Ontario called Niagara-on-the-Lake. I grew up on a peach farm. And I know you're probably sitting there thinking, that is amazing. It must have been so glorious to grow up on a farm around the peaches and grapes and butterflies. It wasn't exactly like that. A lot of families have the motto, family first. Well, we have the motto, farming first at our house. So when I have my 4 children today, tell me about the hardships of working at McDonald's, I have a hard time relating to them. Minimum wage in 2021 is something like $75,000 a year with stock options. I remember the first wage negotiation I ever had with my father. Now my father and I spent nearly every day of the summer together working on the farm. So one of the jobs that I was always chosen for was helping my dad to unclog the irrigation lines on the shores of Lake Ontario. Lake Ontario in the middle of the summer, if you've ever been close to it, is not the most refreshing beach in the world to swim in. When it's blistering hot and when the air isn't moving, it can become kind of stagnant, and the smell, oh God, the smell, it's still right here. And my dad and I would go down to the shore of the lake, and inevitably he would give me the bad news that we had to take our pants off. This was part of my job at age 15, working at Seaway Farms with my dad, was to take our pants off, wade out into the lake, and pull seaweed from an irrigation pipe. My children sometimes complain about working conditions in their jobs, and I have a really difficult time relating to them. So there we would be, living the dream at 10 o'clock at night in our underwear, trying to unclog a pipe. And if you've ever seen those memes where they say, tell me you're a teenager, without actually telling me you're a teenager, I could do that. The look on my face would convey the fact that I was a teenager to my dad. I would just look indignant and upset and angry at all of it. And he would look at me and say, Joe, what is your problem? What is your problem, Joe? And I would tell him in my teenager voice, I don't get paid enough, Dad. I don't get paid enough to do this, Dad. And he would say, is that right? You don't get paid enough. He'd say, tell me who gets paid more than you. Now, this is where farmer logic comes into play. This is what my father taught me, was farmer logic. This was a great way to learn how to negotiate. And I've taught it to all my kids, especially my daughters, is farmer logic. He would say, who gets paid more than you? And I would say, my friend Matt works for the town and he gets paid more than me. And he'd say, is that right? Is that right? How much money does Matt make, Joe? And I would say, Matt makes $8 an hour. He'd say, wow, $8 an hour. That is great. That is great. And he'd say, Joe, how much money do you make? And I'd say, $5 an hour, Dad. He'd say, oh, $5 an hour. He said, and Matt makes more money than you. And I'd say, yes, Matt makes more money than me. He makes $8 an hour. I make $5 an hour. And my dad would say, let me ask you a question, Joe. How many hours a week does Matt work? This is farmer logic. And he was really good with math. I would say, I don't know. He said, what's 8 times 30? I don't know, Dad. It's $240, Joe. $240. That's what Matt makes. He goes, how many hours a week do you work, Joe? I'd say, I don't know. 80? 80 hours a week. What's 5 times 80, Joe? I'd say, I don't know. $400 a week. You make $400 a week. Your friend Matt makes $240 a week. You tell me who makes more money, Junior. That was farmer logic. Now my mom is from Scotland and she's been in Canada since 1968. To this day, she sounds like she just got off the plane from Scotland yesterday. And Scottish moms don't coddle their children. We do so much with our 4 kids, and I know that everyone that's out there does the same to try and enhance our kids' confidence, to try and build their confidence, to try and make them feel better about themselves every day, and to try and make them feel like they aren't perfect and they can do no wrong. Someone told me the other day when I took a picture that my mask wasn't perfectly over my nose. Now that's not a mask problem, that's a nose problem. This is the nose that I was born with, and I used to be really self-conscious about it because my 2 sisters would call me, there was a character from the Muppets, I don't know if you ever watched that show, they would call me Gonzo all the time. And your mom is supposed to be the kind of person to tell you, don't listen to them. You're beautiful just the way you are. And this is what my mom would say to me. Joseph, right enough your nose is big. You've got your father's nose. There's nothing you can do about that, and it'll get bigger as you get older, so just maybe try and do this. Try and pinch your nose up so it doesn't go so far down your face. Maybe if you did that every day. And I don't know if it'll get better. I'll pray for you, but I don't know if it'll make it any better. So that is what I grew up with. If you're wondering what made the person that's sitting in front of you tonight, it was this. That's what. And I don't know if it'll get better. It might, in fact, get worse. So eventually I grew up and got married and had children. A daughter, another daughter, a son, and then another daughter. 4 children. Who does that? We did it. We had 4 kids. And every time someone would say, well, 2 is easier than 1, or 3 is easier than 2, I found that not a lot of people said that 4 was easier than 3. And it turned out that they were right, because it wasn't. We have these 4 amazing kids, but I still couldn't believe some of the stuff that would end up in our laps. We had daughters who were really, really organized, and I don't want to generalize and I don't want to stereotype, but when it was time for school, they were ready. Their hair was done. Their homework was done. They had assignments completed in advance of due dates, and even the youngest was ready to go to school before school was even an option for her. And then I have my son, who is a lot like me, would come down the stairs in the morning with his hair sideways and his favorite t-shirt of all time, his Who Farted shirt. And there's a picture of an owl. It's genius, Daddy. There's an owl who says like, who, then it says farted after that. And he would come downstairs and say, is there school today? Is there school today? And I'd say, Johnny, look at the girls. They're all ready to go. They have their uniforms on, their hair is done. Of course there's school today. He's like, seriously? What day is it? And he would try and call my bluff. And I would tell him, Johnny, it's Wednesday. And he would say, there's school on Wednesday? And I'd be like, every Wednesday, Johnny. Every Wednesday there's school. And he would be mad. And he would walk up the stairs and my wife would be passing him on the way down the stairs. And she'd say, what's wrong, Johnny? And he'd say, apparently there's school on Wednesdays. See, he misuses the word apparently all the time, still does. But as a child, he would say it all the time. Apparently there's school on Wednesdays. Apparently you're not allowed to imitate the teacher. Apparently. He would say it all the time. So one night my son Johnny gets home from school and he is his usual happy-go-lucky self. And then the phone rings and it's his teacher, Mrs. Billard. And Mrs. Billard says, "Joe, can I talk to you about Johnny?" And I said, "Sure, Mrs. Billard, what's going on?" And Johnny heard this. He heard me say Mrs. Billard, and in his mind you could see it all happening. "She called. Oh man, she called. I didn't think she'd call." And he quietly goes up the stairs to his room. And I said, "What happened?" She said, "Well, I don't really want to tell you what happened because it's embarrassing. I'd like you to ask Johnny what happened." And I'd say, "Just tell me what happened." She said, I'd rather that Johnny just tell you what happened." And I'd say, "You won't tell me what happened? It's that bad?" She goes, "I don't want to say it's that bad, but it is embarrassing, and I would prefer that Johnny explain to you what happened." We get off the phone and I call his name. "Johnny! Johnny!" "Yes?" "Come downstairs." And he was like claiming innocence with his voice. "For what? Whatever do you need me for, Father?" I'd say, "Get downstairs right now." So he would come downstairs, had changed into his Who Farted shirt. So it was hard to stay mad at him, but I said, "Johnny, did you get in trouble at school today?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "For what? Why did you get in trouble, Johnny?" And this is what he said. He said, "Which time?" So I said, "Why would Miss Billard be calling me and telling me something really embarrassing happened to you at school today, and then I had to hear it from you?" He'd say, "Oh, you're just going to be mad at me." And I said, "Possibly, but just tell me what happened." And this is what he said. This is what my son said to me. "Pearl snow." And I said, "What?" He said, "Pearl snow." I said, "Snow?" "Yeah, snow." And I said, "What did you say before that?" And he said it a little faster. "Pearly momo snow." And I said, "Are you saying snow? What are you saying, Johnny? Just tell me clearly what you're saying." And these are the words that came out of my son's mouth. This is what he said to me. He said, "Apparently you're not allowed to hump a pile of snow. Apparently you're not." I guess Miss Billard came around the corner and he was showing his friends how he could hump a pile of snow, and apparently you're not allowed to do that. So I have 3 daughters, a 21-year-old named Ariel, an 18-year-old named Olivia, and a 14-year-old named Juliet, and they are great. Great, each and every one of them in their own right. I am speaking to the Canadian Federation of University Women, so I should tell you about my oldest 2 daughters, who are both women in university. So before the time of COVID, we would regularly go up and visit our daughters at university when that was possible. And we would go to my oldest daughter's house, and we would go in and go downstairs to the basement, where they had a basement apartment, and there would be empty wine bottles and pink Whitney bottles and empty cases of beer. And I would look around and I'd say, "You know, honey, we used to clean this stuff up before our parents came." So this is the difference between my children and what they say to us and the reality of my upbringing. And that's this. She looks at me and she says, "Daddy, do you want us to have a relationship where I'm just lying to you and not being completely truthful about what's happening in my life?" And as I thought about it, I thought, yes, that would make me feel better than what I'm seeing right now in this house. Because we've lost 2 daughters. They've moved away, and you never know if they're going to come back. So what we've done at our house to deal with that loss is we've bought dogs. So every time a child leaves, we buy a new dog. We have 2 cockapoos at our house, Georgina and Chestnut, and they're great. They're by no means better than the girls were when they're like the same. They're a little bit, because they don't ever yell at me about anything. So that either way, we have 2 cockapoos at the house, and I think it's important to talk about this as a public service announcement, that if you're going to get a cockapoo, and I don't want to pry into the bedroom lives of anybody watching this tonight, but if you're going to get a cockapoo, don't get the very special kind of cockapoo that we got, which is both of them are the same breed, and it's very important that you not get the specific breed that we got, and that is it's not just a cockapoo, it's a cock blockapoo. We have 2 cock blockapoos at our house. They jump onto my wife's lap at night and they're basically yelling, "Defense! Defense!" So it's April of 2021 and COVID is still here. In fact, when the world turned upside down last year in March of 2020, our entire family was on vacation in Mexico. Now we'd booked this vacation and flown down before travel restrictions were anything that anybody had to think about, but all of it happened while we were in Mexico. And it was stressful because everyone was panicking. Everyone would look at their phones every day and start a new rumor saying that flights were canceled, or borders were closed, or nobody was allowed to fly back to Canada. And my dad and mom are, if anything, very generous tippers. And so they would always have this philosophy that if we were going anywhere, they were tipping large. It didn't matter what was included in the price of the hotel or the resort or not, that they were just going to share whatever they had with whoever they could. And that included our Air Canada rep at the resort in Mexico. His name was David. And my mom would say, just give David another $20. He's a lovely young man and he's got a young family, and give him another $20. And my dad would say, hey, give him this, just give him this, make sure he's got it. And so whenever he would see us, David would say, it's the Piliteri family. Nice to see you, Piliteris. And all of us, all 30 of us would say, nice to see you, David. It's Piliteri family, it's my favorite family of the resort, the Piliteri family. And so as these rumors were starting and people were saying that flights were closed, that the Canadian border was closing, my dad would tell me, go talk to David, go talk to David, go talk to Joseph, ask David if this is true. And I would go up and see David and I would say, David, we heard that they're canceling all of the outbound flights from the resort back to Canada. And he would say, no, that's not true. You want to know how that's true? If this rumor is true that they close all of the flights from the resort back to Canada, you know how you will know for sure? If you come here between the hours of 9 o'clock and 3 o'clock when we're open, and if I'm not sitting at my desk, that's how you know the rumors are true. They don't pay me enough to deal with two people if they cancel all the flights back to Canada. So that was the first COVID-related service shutdown we'd ever experienced, was if David wasn't in his chair, the flights were going to be canceled. People talk about how to stay safe during COVID, or what the worst symptoms of the disease could be if you catch it. And my parents, having spent most of the last year together in their house without a lot of visitors, I can say confidently that COVID is not going to kill my father, that my father is much more likely to die at the hands of my mother. They've had it with each other. My dad watching hours upon hours of Judge Judy in his underwear in the middle of winter, and my mom threatening not to use the defibrillator that they bought in case something bad happens to my dad's heart. Vince, I'm so sick and tired of you sitting here watching this television in your underwear. If you did have a heart attack, I'll tell you what, I would wait 5 or 10 minutes before I even took that thing off the wall. So having talked a little bit about COVID, I thought it was important to mention to everybody that I completely lost my mind in 2008. That I was a person who had never before experienced a mental health crisis and honestly didn't really believe that they existed, and I went into a crippling nervous breakdown. I should tell you how that happened. In 2007, I bought a business called Lakeview Vineyard Equipment. I know, very exciting, very glamorous. But the business that I bought was doing well in 2007. We actually had a really good year in 2007, and I just assumed that every year would be like 2007, and that within maybe 5 or 10 years, I would be like an eccentric millionaire with like a pet tiger. And that's not exactly how it went. I don't know if any of you were alive in 2008 when the economy completely collapsed, but that marked a small change in my plans in terms of owning a tiger. In 2008, people that bought vineyard equipment didn't really need it because people that were buying expensive wine weren't really buying expensive wine anymore. I had a lot of inventory. I had new employees. We had just moved into a new building that I was renting. And in 2007, none of that seemed like a big deal. But in 2008, all of that seemed like a very big deal. So my reaction, and as opposed to anything you might have read in a business book or a self-help book, my reaction was, instead of going out and finding an action plan and doing things every day to make things better, is that I would come into this office instead, sit at my desk and cry. I would cry every day. I would close the door to my office and just completely wallow in self-pity and cry. The more I tried to think about how this was going to get better, the more impossible it seemed that it ever would get better, and the more completely probable it seemed that it would always get worse. And during that time, it was really tough for me. It was the worst feeling I'd ever had in my life, and to be honest with you, it's the worst feeling I've ever experienced since then in my life. 3 things happened to help me out of it. Now, these 3 things, I should add, were in addition to things like professional counseling and meditation. But there were 3 events during that time in May of 2008, or what my wife now affectionately refers to as my spring breakdown of 2008, that helped me through it. And the one was the love of my wife. The love of my wife was an important one for me, because my wife was a person who was living her vows. I'm a pretty optimistic person, so when you exchange wedding vows with a partner and they say for better or for worse, I don't really think about the worst part. I never really did think about the worst part. I thought maybe it's going to be cold in the winter at one point, but I didn't really think that I would have mind-crippling anxiety and the inability to leave my office without crying. So I had the love of my wife, and here's what happened with my wife during that crazy time. 2008 also happened to be our 10th wedding anniversary, and for months we had talked about booking a trip to Italy for our 10th. And as I was struggling with everything and worried every day that I was going to go broke here, and that there was just going to be a big equipment auction and everyone was going to celebrate the fact that I was going broke, life was going on for my wife with our 4 young children, and she was taking them to sports and taking them to dance. And I did decide to go to the soccer field to see our children play soccer at one point. And by see our children play soccer, I mean watch the grass grow at the soccer field where our kids played soccer. And as I was struggling just to try and keep my mind going, we had talked about this trip to Italy, and I said there was no way that I could go, that I didn't ever think it was a good idea at that point. And my wife just sort of blurted out while we were standing there at the soccer field in Niagara Lake that she had booked a trip. And I said, what do you mean you booked a trip? And she said that she had booked the trip to Italy. And I was still in the middle of this crisis where I had inventory to sell, where I had employees that I was worried about. And my wife said she booked a trip, and she told me that she booked a trip for 3 reasons. She told me she booked a trip because she loved me, that she really wanted to experience Italy with me, and that she believed that whatever I was going through, I would get through and be successful doing it. So she booked a trip to Italy, and at the time I was furious. At the time I was so furious that I left the soccer field, and I got into our vehicle and I closed the door, and I was going to drive somewhere, but my wife had driven to the soccer field, so I didn't even have anywhere where I could run away to, but I wanted to let her know that if I could, I would have. We ended up going to Italy in July of 2008, and it ended up being the best trip I'd ever had in my life to that point. And that was part of the way that my wife showed me love. She also did this other thing where she told our 4 kids to tell me that they loved me every day. So I was a guy who, although emotional and expressive, hadn't really had any breakdowns in front of my children. And I went from never having had a breakdown in front of my children to coming home and crying every day and worrying about the impending doom hanging over my head. And my wife would tell the children to say that they loved me every day. Now, I know this for a reason, because my oldest daughter would come up just randomly. My oldest daughter, Ariel, would come up to me and say, "I love you, Daddy." And then my second oldest child, Olivia, would walk up not long after Ariel left and say, "I love you, Daddy." And then my son, Johnny, would just stroll in, playing hockey or doing whatever he was doing, just yell across the room, "I love you, Daddy." And then our youngest child, Juliet, who was only 3 at the time, would walk up to me, look me directly in the eyes and say, "Daddy, Mommy said to say that we love you. She said that we're supposed to say that we love you every day, so I love you because Mommy said to say that." So that was my wife showing me love. My father, who I've talked about, my father helped me learn action. So my dad helped me learn action. My dad, who was this farmer who never has stopped working to the age of 78, where he sits right now. He taught me action. So my dad knew that I was struggling, and he would come by my office looking for me. And if I couldn't get out of bed in the morning because I was just not having it, the phone would start to ring, and it was my dad. And my dad would call me up and say things like, Joe, it's your father. Your truck's not at work. You're not working today? And I would answer him, Dad, I'm not feeling great. Okay, you're not feeling great? You're sick? And I'd be like, well, I am sick. I'm not sick, because that was the thing. We never talked about mental health in my house growing up. With my children, I talk about mental health like it's dental health. But in our house, we never talked about any illness of the mind. So I really couldn't say I was sick. I could just say I wasn't feeling right. And my dad would kind of just keep calling. You got to get to work, Joe. You got to get to work. And I would come into my office, shut the door, and cry. And my dad would see my truck here. So he would drive in and ask the people at work that worked with me, who were all very concerned about me, if I was here. And as opposed to anybody else who would gingerly knock on the door, my dad would just sort of boot the door open and say, "What's wrong with you?" And I would say, "Dad, I'm worried." And he said, "You're worried? What are you worried about?" And I would say, "I don't know what I'm worried about." And he would blurt things out like, "What are you worried your wife and kids are going to leave you? What are you worried your wife and kids are going to leave you?" And I would say to him, "Well, I hadn't thought about that, but thank you for making it something else to swirl through my head." And he would say, Joe, what are you worried about?" And I'd say, "I'm worried I'm going to go broke, Dad. I'm worried I'm going to go broke." And he says, "How are you going to go broke?" I said, "I'm not going to sell anything." And he said, "You're right. If you worry that you're not going to sell anything, you won't sell anything. And if you worry you're going to go broke, you will go broke." My dad said one thing that really stuck with me. It was a clear statement that he said to me that's never left me. And he told me this. He said, "Joe, the worry and the fear will never get you. The worry and the fear will never get you. Not getting up and doing the work, that's what'll get you. Not taking action, that's the stuff that'll get you." It was a lesson that sort of woke me up. He told me that day, this is how my dad phrased it. He said, "Why don't you get your little Bluetooth and start calling customers?" And I said, "Do you mean my phone?" He said, "No, your little Bluetooth thing." I said, "I don't know what you mean by my little Bluetooth, Dad." He goes, "You got customers with the phone numbers?" And I said, "You mean my database?" "I don't give a shit what you call it, Joe. Just use your Bluetooth and call people." And I did. I started calling people. I called everybody I knew to see if anybody was interested in buying any of the $1 million that I had for sale. Because the bank had been calling and they kind of wanted their $1 million. And the thing was, I wasn't answering the bank's calls. And eventually, when you don't answer the bank's calls, the bank stops by and they ask you a little bit more formally about the $1 million that you owe them. So I decided that day I was going to try and scare up some of that million. And after a full day of phone calls and 15 people that I reached out to and had good conversations with, I had sold 1/10 of my problem. And it struck me that my dad just telling me to do something inspired me to do something. And at that point, it was kind of addictive. I did the same thing every day, not necessarily getting rich doing it, but it was action. And the action definitely felt better than the fear. The last thing that really changed my life during all of this was Terry Fox. Terry Fox is, of course, a Canadian hero, but he is my personal hero. So I had gone through this phase where I was starting to sell equipment, where I had booked a trip to Italy, unbeknownst to me, but I still was kind of searching for purpose, thinking even if it gets better, what am I actually doing this for? I was doing a project for my daughter. I was doing a heritage fair project for my daughter. I'm sorry, I should rephrase that. I was helping my daughter do a heritage fair project, and she had a book about Terry Fox, and of course I knew who Terry Fox was, but I really never read the details of his story. And there was a really poignant part of one of the books that she had that told me this, that Terry Fox had been diagnosed with cancer and he was losing his leg. But before all of that, He was an all-star athlete at any sport he attempted, and he was really bitter and resentful and upset about his diagnosis and his plight. But while he was sitting in a children's hospital in British Columbia, he heard the cries of children who were much younger than him, children who hadn't had the chance to experience the things he had to that point in his life. And he decided that night, before he went to sleep, that he was going to run across Canada on one leg to raise money and awareness for cancer research. And it really stuck with me that I really had never had that kind of perspective in my life, that no matter what I was experiencing, there was someone who was going through something a little bit more difficult or a lot more difficult, and someone who was going to rise to that occasion. So Terry Fox did that. His family didn't want him to, but his mom knew that once he had announced he was doing it to them, there was nothing that was going to change his mind. So that first year in 2008, I joined the Terry Fox Run. And I don't want to brag, but I raised $385 for the Terry Fox Foundation that year. I hope you're all still seated after you heard that number. But I did decide that the Terry Fox Foundation should be a part of the purpose of my life, in addition to some other philanthropic stuff I've tried to do since then. But Terry Fox was going to be a big focus for me because his story, his hope, and his perspective gave me perspective. So since then, in the years after that, Team Pillsy, that I am a part of, has raised closer to $250,000 for the Terry Fox Foundation. I'm proud of that, not because of the number or not because of what it took to make the number happen. I'm proud of that because it's a constant reminder to me and to my children that there are heroes in our lives that will walk in without us even knowing that they're going to be a hero, that they'll give us purpose without us even knowing that they're going to give us purpose, and that sometimes they'll change the direction your life is going. And that's what Terry Fox did for me. So there you have it. I had love, I had action, and I had hope. I knew that no matter what happened, my wife and my 4 kids were going to love me, no matter what. I knew that whatever happened, all I could do was come in to this office, the place that I used to sit and cry, and do the best I could every day, to take action every day. No matter what was going on in the economy or the world, I would come in here and do my best every day, and that was going to have to be enough. And I had hope that I would live by Terry Fox's example every day, to try to do good by the world and good by myself, good by my family, and that I would live with hope every day, that in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds, I could do something every day to try and make it better. I'm wishing all of you a great night tonight, a great spring of 2021, with or without the fling, and better times ahead for all of us. Cheers and have a great night.